Hi, everyone, and welcome to Reflections, where I share information, insights, and understandings around different themes that come through either the clients that I work with, or people that I meet on the road, or my own life experiences. So, I wanted to explore today something called the quarter life crisis. It's been quite interesting because many of the younger people that I'm coming into contact with are showing some signs of stress, burnout, a sense of disillusionment about the world, anxiety, and fears about the future, as well as lots of other fears. So, I wanted to share a little bit more of an insight into what this means. If you are not between 20 and 30, and I'm not saying they are strictly the age that people will feel this, but we know that the average system is that you go to school until you're 16 or 18, go to college, you might go to university. And the idea is that you go to university and you work really hard for 4 years and you choose a topic that is going to be really supportive in you developing a career. And there's a massive emphasis placed on how you do at school or how you do at university as to how well you're going to do in life. Too much of an emphasis, many of us in the professional field thinks we're placing on that, especially now with young people, with the work situations changing so fast. And the type of courses that we need to study in comparison to what we needed to study a few years ago has also massively shifted. So it's created a bit of a crisis situation for a lot of young people, and has emerged way more in the research than I'd realised. I was starting to come into contact with this kind of idea in a way that was I was noticing in the work that I was doing with younger clients. A lot of my client group tended to be over 40s and 50s, especially people that I was meeting at the Mind, Body, and Spirit events. Although that has also started to change, we're seeing a younger crowd coming to that now too. And so I started to really think about what is it that's going on. I know we've had massive changes since 2020, with globally what happened to everybody, and of course there's an impact on that. And we're seeing that impact in all sorts of systems, mostly the mental health system, but also what's happening to people in terms of their education and the courses they're choosing, and kind of how they're thinking about what they're going to do with the rest of their life. And themes that used to come through people who were maybe going through more midlife crises, which was seeing you enter that in your 40s and 50s of who am I, where am I going, what have I been doing all my life, has it gone well, did I utilize my time well, um, did I make the right choices, is there anything I wish I would have done, and where do I want to go next, are often the kind of questions that come to people, especially if you've worked in public services and you can retire at 55 and draw on a pension. Then you'd be thinking, okay, so what do I do with my life now? My children have grown up. Have I got any hobbies? How do I see myself living out into my 60s, 70s, and 80s? So some of those themes have been seen as, fairly regular. And we've known for a long time that people can start to ask those questions. We've also seen a lot of research emerging about the menopause, perimenopause, and the life stages that people go through, and the challenges that we are faced at different phases in life. Just as Carl Jung used to write about, we go through different things at different ages. But what we're seeing with younger people is they're starting to look at things that was maybe very uncommon maybe a decade ago. So I'm going to share some of what I've discovered on this just to flag it up. So if you're not in this cluster of people, because I know that not everything fits neatly into a box, is please keep open-minded and be aware of your own judgments about how we think people should experience the world, where they're at, and whether or not we think they've got justification for feeling as they are. Because really, there's a world of difference between me and my sons and my granddaughter, and in terms of education, friendships, access to social media, and the amount of access to information, good or bad, we've got at the moment, um, seriously has an influence on us in all sorts of ways. So, quarter life crises. So, what is that? I'll go into that in a moment and about what that looks like and some of the key themes that have emerged through. But I wanted to share some of the research with you. So there was a systematic literature review done by Hasim and Berber, identified both internal and external factors contributing to something called the quarter life crises among young adults. They analysed 14 articles from a pool of 3,100 publications. And the key internal factors, so that's kind of what's going on inside of us, included commitment to purpose, spirituality, and anxiety, while social support, age, and gender were significant external factors. Based on those search results, there doesn't appear to be any specific UK-based studies, but I did find a few that looks at what the long-term effects of that quarter life crisis might be. And we know the world is going through massive changes. It's experienced different in different countries, depending on, the economics and the cultural values of that country and how those countries are run. But we know that it's more of a global issue. So there was a piece of research done by someone called Dr. Oliver Robinson at the University of Greenwich in the UK, who looked at female university graduates over a 4-year period after leaving university. So it doesn't focus specifically on the long-term effects, but it provides insights into how the quarter life crises can unfold over time. So I identified 2 types of crises that are experienced by people. The first one is the locked out crises, when we're struggling to find work after graduation, and the locked in crises, when we're feeling trapped in a job that we don't like, or we've got a bullying boss. Anyone who's got into their 50s, I think a fair amount of people would have experienced some issues at work at some stage in their life. But we know that the values and beliefs and the gap between the older population, the younger population can be quite wide. Not in all cases, but it can be. So Dr. Oliver Robinson also looked at 2,000 British millennials and found 56% described being in a quarter life crisis, half of the population. While not focused on the long-term effects, he identified the key types of phases. So a lot of this has been around the conversations around the labour market, that we know work was massively impacted during COVID. Some people had to go to work, like in factories, and change what they were producing overnight, and other people, their whole lives shut down. The theatre, film, hairdressing, catering industries all closed down overnight and only opened up for bursts when lockdown was lifted. And again, that was different in different parts of the country. So we know with a study that was done in Leeds, to understand the quarter life crisis experience amongst young people from India and in the UK, was providing insights into those longer term impacts. So what I would say initially is what I've noticed, and I've been working, if you listen to any of my other podcasts, you'll know that I've been working in mental health and wellbeing for over 25 years, and initially, trained as a therapist, and then went and started working in schools, and then trained more up in mental health, and then ran a mental health service. And we often used to see themes at different stages of the year, as well as over the years, in terms of the kind of things that we would see. But one of the ways that we would start looking at the experiences that people went through is who was more likely to experience difficulties or issues with their mental health by the time they got to their teenage years or adult years. Because what the research had shown us is that high proportion of the mental health difficulties that adults were experiencing, that more serious mental health issues, had actually started to develop from around the age of 14 and 15. And I know that with my work in schools, I was certainly seeing this, that if they transitioned well into secondary school and fairly happy, healthy child and a fairly stable family, they might have some difficulties in school, but they had enough of the factors that supported their resilience where they got through. For other young people, they might have high levels of resilience, but they might have also quite a few vulnerabilities. And that was identified in research around adverse childhood experiences. So I won't go into that in detail, but if you want to look it up, there's lots. There's a TED talk on several TED talks on that, about what that means. But fundamentally, it means that if you've got several different factors that you've experienced as a child, it may make you more vulnerable to experiencing mental health problems later on in life. But it's not it's not a direct lane. It doesn't mean to say you get in a lane and you're stuck there, because also what we've seen at the same time over the last few years is our awareness around mental health and our capacity to understand ourselves, learn more about ourselves outside of the therapeutic room means that we're much more likely to notice things earlier on and identify or be able to articulate some of those experiences. We also know that a proportion of these young people, if they haven't gone to university or even after university, are then working for an organisation somewhere. And so UK employers are also having to recognise the impact that that's having on the employees and think about the type of strategies to support them in their wellbeing strategies. And again, I've got a separate podcast to explore workplace and workplace support in more detail. But we know that things like career innovation, company insights, coaching and mentoring, flexible work environment, career development opportunities, learning and growth, strengths-based approach, and support programs will really support the employees. But going back to the research on quarter-life crises, we also saw that there was a study done in 2020 on how that's represented in social media. So there was a company that analysed over 1.5 million tweets from over 1,400 users, and the researchers identified themes such as mixed emotions, feeling stuck, a desire for change, career concerns, illness, school and family issues. And the language used by these individuals was focused on the future. And 16 out of 20 terms associated with early adult crisis theory was more frequently mentioned in that group compared to a controlled group. So we know that there's a prevalence and predictors are quite high, and different research papers have been brought out on that as an issue. We also know that there are various ways that we've been thinking about how do we support people generally who are in crises, and that has often been a small percentage of young people. We did have crisis services, and you would see it more in adults. And like I said, midlife was a phase where people might start to struggle and start to question themselves and who they are. But we're seeing that trend happening in this age group. So some of the issues or themes, internal factors that are impacting people are things like commitment to purpose. So struggling with finding or committing to a life purpose can lead to significant distress during early adulthood. The lack of direction often exacerbates feelings of uncertainty and anxiety. And I know that when I was at a workplace conference last year, we were starting to hear themes around young people wanting to find more meaning and purpose in work. And that was pretty unheard of a decade ago, maybe even 5 years ago. Um, you know, I can't talk for everybody, but it was fairly common in working class systems that you just got a job at 16 because it paid you and it put food on the table, and that was it. And if you were lucky, you would love your job, and if you weren't, you might stay in it for a long time. But there wasn't anything around really finding the meaning and purpose in life. It was really about survival. So we're moving out of survival into this idea of thriving. People can also start to look at their own spirituality. So we're starting to see young people opening up in spiritual terms, but again, it's different for different people. But they're switching on to the common trends within the spiritual movement and start to examine more of the esoteric world. But the person's spiritual beliefs and practices can also influence their experience of quarter-life crises. So there was some research about adults that people who have an affinity or an affiliation with a particular religion will manage different time points in life, often with much more ease, unless, of course, they start to question their own spirituality and religion. We're also seeing much higher levels of anxiety, frequently reported amongst these individuals experiencing this quarter-life crises, often stemming from the pressure related to career, relationships and personal achievements. And we know that when you're at school, I was working in several secondary schools at one point in my career, and I wish I had a penny not even a pound. But every time a teacher said to a young person, make sure you study, these exams are really important. It affects the rest of your life. You want to do really well. And the amount of anxiety that teachers feel that they were projecting onto the children was rarely ever discussed. And then, they would be sent to my therapy room because they're under stress and struggling at school. So it was a bit of a challenge in that way. So in some sense, it was teaching them to be able to capitalize on the things that work for them in terms of study and find fun things to do and things outside of only just focusing on education. So anxiety has been a common symptom, and we saw the anxiety rates of young people increasing in the UK anyway from about 2014, 2015, but massively increased during COVID. The uncertainty and stress has also massively increased, and the idea about dating and relationships has become an area that is a very grey area in terms of what our roles and understanding of dating relationships is massively impacted by your own experiences growing up in your own family, as well as how society has changed. And in some of my other themes in reflections, I look at dating and relationships and at the various points in history, because if you understand that at different points in history, our attitudes and behaviors are influenced by what's going on outside in the world. So in the 20s, it was very different to the 1930s and 40s, when there was war going on and the whole lifestyle changed for everybody, and the whole way of dating massively changed as well. So politics, census laws, um, class, race, culture, gender, everything is in the mix when we start talking about dating and relationships. So I'm looking forward to developing that conversation even further. So if they've already got some mental health issues, then this quarter life crisis is exacerbating it, because we're just layering all those other concerns. If they've already had some issues in their teenage years or at university, and a lot of young people do, then that fear, that sadness, that anxiety, or even post-traumatic stress disorder may be present and not diagnosed, then they'll be struggling with that too. And there's only a certain amount really that the psyche can cope with. There's only so far we can be overwhelmed before we need to get support or put measures in place to prevent anything serious happening. That's why I'm always saying that, regardless of whether you like your therapist first time or not, or you have problems with your doctor or anything, don't struggle alone. I've had really good supportive friends, hopefully people in the family that can support you, but also where needed, sometimes medication is needed in some senses. So the long-term effects of things like anxiety, depression can go on for much longer. And what we know is the more that you've experienced being that way, then the harder it is to maybe see that things can improve, or that you can start to experience more life satisfaction and joy. Although that can change if your home and work circumstances change, or you meet someone and you start to have some amazing times. So we know that the uncertainty has increased, and we've got more concerns around identity now, and identity confusion. And I'm not talking just about gender, but it's, there's lots of young people out there that are in mixed, multi-heritage and mixed race families. And so have to navigate their future with all these ideas of who am I, where am I from, who are my parents, what does this mean to me? And these are well documented in organisations that do support mixed race couple and children. So if you have got a background where you would identified as mixed race, multi-heritage, it's labelled differently in different countries, but start reading some of the material on that, get some books, because often people's personal journeys are in there and you don't realise there are other people like you that are going through those situations, and that can really, support you. So we know that, it will increase the risk of anxiety, increase the risk of depression. It depends on your resilience and what tools you have in your toolbox, and can also influence your emotional stability. And so when you go into crises, it can involve extreme emotional swings, and include periods of intense anxiety or low moods, and even, removing yourself from activities, friendships, and not keeping in contact with people. It can also really make yourself question your values and beliefs. And as young adults reassess their identity, they may also question those core values and beliefs, which interestingly, I did see to some degree when I was working with year 10s, which was 15-year-olds often, was they might have followed particular trends, ways of dress, listening to certain music, the way they looked, how they spoke, whether they spoke slang or not, depending on where in the country they were, what they like to do for hobbies. But then when they get to sort of around 14, 15, might start to think, actually, I don't really like that music. I like this band. I like wearing this style of dress. And so it depends on how close or distant to that group you are when you start to connect with your own sense of authentic being in that moment. What tastes do you have? What do you like and don't like? If it's quite different from the group, then I would see that sometimes there was some problems, because there's a risk then that you're going to be ostracized from the group, or you're celebrated by the group. So it can be different for everybody. So that can add another layer. So it can also mean a lack of coping mechanisms, and I certainly saw that in my work. The young people that had the resilience, that had fairly strong self-esteem because they were doing well academically, might have some coping mechanisms that can help them get through some of these more challenging times of uncertainty, and deal with some of those things, or might have a stronger support system around them than some of the other people that I came into contact with. So if we think about some of the tools, which I'll go into in a moment. So before I go into tools, I'm just going to cover the main themes that have come out of the research, and there may be others. So the first one is self-doubt and uncertainty. So we know that if you've existed in an environment, say in the education system, and you've struggled with any particular subjects, then that doubt in your own ability to study can lessen. And your understanding about your abilities might be not on point. Your perception of yourself might not match the perception of the teachers. So it may be that they think you're doing well, but you might have certain standards or be a perfectionist, and then everything that doesn't match up to that can certainly throw you into a spiral and move you into self-doubt. But there is some real uncertainty out there anyway, that, in terms of everything that's going on globally, which is adding to those sort of internal feelings of uncertainty. And the other aspect is self-identity and purpose. So it's like, who am I? What's my role in the world? What do I want to do? I want to enjoy the work that I do. My family think I should be a doctor or a lawyer, and I want to go to drama college or be a photographer, and how you balance this idea of who people think you should become because it's a job and it's well paid. But again, I wish I had a penny or at least a pound for every time, somebody has said that what they did at school or university didn't really connect with them, and they later found something that they enjoy doing, a job, and it might have haphazardly happened. But there is a proportion of people that can go into work that just aren't really connecting with that. It may be that they can do it, but they don't enjoy many of the aspects. And I certainly know there was lots about my job that I enjoyed when I was doing it. And that's how I managed the stress, because I did enjoy delivering a lot of the projects. I enjoyed teaching, going into schools, consulting with teachers, supporting them to support young people. But actually sitting down, sending emails and doing admin. And it became a lot. And when it became a lot, when I worked as a manager, took some of the fun and joy out of the work, you see. So, sometimes there's a price to pay. And sometimes you start off doing one thing and then you end up doing more of something else. So they're the kind of questions that come up. And on a different recording for meditation, I've done affirmations that are about these themes that have emerged, such as our emotional well-being and our personal development and social expectations, career and financial pressure, relationship and social support, life milestones and comparisons, environmental and social changes, and more. But they were the sort of key areas. So like I said, if you want to do a meditation on that, then look at the ones that I've done on affirmations. So now we go into what can you do? So there's a fair bit of information here. So what I suggest you do is listen to this podcast, but pause it, get your journal out, and where something means something to you, where you can connect with what I'm saying, write it down, capture it as a note, and any reflections you have about that. And then consider whether or not you're having a kind of negative view of what I'm talking about or a positive view. I don't mean in terms of what I'm sharing, but more in terms of what your own internal dialogue is doing. Are you in this negative frame of mind or in a positive frame of mind, or is it a mixture of two? And then just notice what you notice, and then take from this what you need to as your starting point. You could take one thing that you think would do, that would help you. So I'm going to go through those main themes and turn them into what tools can help. But it's difficult to do all the tools all the time. You've got to be really disciplined to get that level of focus. So it may be one or two tools stand out and they can get you started. But if you're really struggling, you're in a crisis, you need to be getting supportive. If you're at a university, I think they're fairly well aware of this in different universities, then you might be to get support of the wellbeing service, because they'll know academically how you're doing, what you're struggling with, what type of work is out there that you could go for. And everything else about maybe your friendships, and you don't have to explain anything. Or maybe you find a therapist that works there or online somewhere, and you can start to explore this. But people, I think, need to understand that this is a very real thing, that young people are going through it. And that research that's been done, it's talking about 57% of young people. And I've been seeing that in my work. Pretty much everyone's coming through with similar themes of that age range. So, as we know, self-reflection is a really powerful tool and can help us unpack and understand what we're thinking, what we're feeling, and how it affects our behaviour. And that comes from thinking in terms of like CBT. What's the thought? What's the feeling? And how does that affect us? Now, not everything comes as a thoughts first, and that doesn't matter so much. But if you have a thought at the moment to what I'm saying, then write down what the feeling is that then it is activated in you. And that will give you some idea. If you have a very strong feeling, that gives you an idea of maybe what you need to work on and what you can work through and process. And when you learn some of these tools, it gets easier and easier to process. But when you don't know and you don't understand and you're in a sense of confusion, it can feel very scary. I've had people not coming back to yoga second or third time because sitting down and becoming aware of what they're feeling in their bodies, in their minds, in their feelings, in their muscles, can then lead them to really feel what's going on for them, and that can activate some stress, some fear, or bring up issues that they don't want to think about right now. So we've got to be really mindful. So again, just approach this gently and get that support. So first of all would be maybe understanding stress. I think any young person or adult that's come into any of the rooms that I've worked in, I've often helped them understand what stress is, how it manifests, how it might be experienced, and then explore how they're experiencing stress, how the brain works with the thoughts that then create stress and the stress feelings and the stress chemicals, and how we can start to utilize some of these tools to then empower ourselves and then sort of get a reign of what's going on in our mind, body, and spirit again. The other aspect of this is in overwhelm is when you're studying so hard, you're not getting rest. So if your sleep's been affected, sleep, hydration, good nutrition, stress management techniques could all go a long way. And then talking to somebody, don't sit in isolation, and don't spend your whole life just on a laptop gaming or chatting to people through a screen. Sometimes real life connections can really make a difference. And for people who came through university during COVID, a lot of those became much more secluded and have struggled to come out of that seclusion. So again, life's about balance. I'm fairly an introvert, so I can stay, indoors for days, and then I like to get out. And we're all different in terms of how we re-energize. But if you're overwhelmed, you need to sleep and you need to get good rest. So we cannot underestimate the power of rest. So we need to prioritize where we're at right now. So you do a review of how you're feeling right now. If you're feeling in a crisis and your head is spinning everywhere, then doing grounding exercises that we talk about in yoga can also make a difference, where you start to take some deep breaths, find somewhere safe, either in the house or in the garden or wherever you're staying. Being by water can be good for some people, and you start to take deep breaths so that you start to calm the mind down. Because when you're in overwhelm, your thoughts whiz around everywhere in your head. So that is a priority that I would say. And then you look at what is happening before you go to sleep and when you wake up, because the kind of way that you think before you go to sleep will influence the quality of sleep you have, whether or not you dream, and whether you wake up feeling rested or exhausted. So in some places we call it sleep hygiene. You get a bath or a shower. You imagine that you're just washing off all the stresses of the day. You write down what's gone well that day, and any of those negative thoughts you keep at bay. You don't watch the news. You don't plug into irritating conversations on social media, for example, at 10 o'clock at night, because that will reactivate that external stuff, reactivates the internal stuff, and that will make it better. It's not straight away where you wake up in the morning and then in the morning you think about, okay, what's the key thing I need to do today? One thing I need to do today that if I do that, I will feel that I've achieved something. And that could be, if you're depressed and anxious, that could just be, I got out and I made my bed. Or I got out, made my bed, and had a shower. I had a shower and I made a drink. I made a drink and I went for a walk. These are like basics of life, but when you do slip into deep anxiety or depression, those basic functions of life become and can feel quite difficult. So be kind to yourself, be compassionate, watch that inner dialogue, the kind of things that you say to yourself. And if you're being quite mean to yourself, do you talk to yourself in a way that is detrimental? And would you talk that way to a good friend? And if not, then you need to think about what you're saying to yourself. So understanding those priorities. So you can write that down, but even just reflect on what is it that's going on right now? What do I need to do right now? What do I need to do today? So this is where we start thinking about living in the moment, because we know from some of the research that it's easy to activate our fear systems and have fear about the future and have anxiety about the future, because our amygdala will fire up quite easily. But it's sometimes difficult to feel a good feeling about the future because the body's just not always releasing those chemicals. And sometimes we've got to learn some techniques to elicit that feeling. That's often through past experiences we've had that have been good, challenges that we faced, that we got through, things that we found difficult, that then we got through that too. Those successes in our previous history sometimes has to be our resource that we tap into. So often I'm teaching people how to do that. So we need to step back, defrag, get some rest, and then decide. And sometimes with the help of somebody else, what do I need to do today? If you've got people around you who are all telling you what you should do and not do, just ask to have a break. Say, can we just give this a rest for a few days? Give yourself a week. Have a mental holiday of a week if you can. 2 weeks if you're in. Semesters are different everywhere, but if you've got a period of time of 2 weeks or 6 weeks, try and use some of that time, then focus on fun activities, because fun and joy increases your sense of well-being and gives you at least some respite from the bigger global pictures. And that's sometimes the other thing, is we shouldn't really go global in our thinking until we've sorted out the micro feelings and emotions, because if we turn them into macro, those anxieties get bigger and depression and fear gets bigger, when as we need to go into the micro to sort them out first and turn them into something more positive, which is hard to see when you're right in it. And I've been there a few times, so believe me, can feel really tough when you're in it. If you're religious or spiritual, then connecting to the practices and routines and rituals that support you. I found that when I started to implement some discipline into my life and routines and rituals, and I'm talking about lighting a candle, doing some meditation, getting up, doing yoga at a particular time, making sure I got out of bed regardless. I only have one day when I might, when I might just chill all day. Is they really made a difference on how I felt, and I started to feel like I got some order in the chaos. Because if we're just feeling the chaos, it definitely feels too much. Okay, so that can then help us start to consider each step. So we might not have a clear sense of direction for the whole of the journey of now to the end of the year. We might have a direction today and then this week. So today it might be you have a conversation with somebody. Tomorrow it might be that you source a book. The third day it might be that you have a conversation around your career, if you're not in work and you're at university. So you might also go through different stages of your own identity, and that's fairly common. Something I read years ago that really helped me when I was struggling, when I was doing my research around race, culture, and difference, it also covered deeply identity and how identity politics has been influenced by census laws, by politics, by all sorts of different agendas over the last 100 years. So what I sort of decided to do was I read this book by Ernesto Spinelli, who is a philosophical psychotherapist, but works in what's called an existential model. And he talked about identity. This is going back to the 80s, where it's fluid, it's not fixed. But if we think it's fixed and not fluid, and I'm not talking necessarily in the way that people talk about it now, but we don't have to figure it out straight away. We don't have to choose. It's more about realizing what your own values and beliefs are. And our beliefs are often just opinions that become ingrained. So it's really about what we value. What do we value and what matters to us? What gets us up in the morning? What inspires us? What's the thing that sparks us that we just will get involved with without even thinking about it? Is that helping older people? Is that working in the community? Is that fairness and justness? Is it education for all? Is it housing? Is it that you want to make a difference to the world? It can be any of those things, and it doesn't have to manifest in a particular way. So, for example, if you knew you were good at communicating, you can do it through podcasts, you do it through um, radio, through blogs, through writing books. There's all sorts of different ways to capitalize and utilize those skills or those things that you love to do. So that won't necessarily come to you straight away. What we're talking about is this slowly unfolding of what was who you thought you were and what you don't really associate with, and how you do that, and how you process the feelings around letting go of some of those ideas about who you thought you were and where you thought you was going and what direction and what job you think you should take. That's a process, as well as moving into starting to understand what you do like and don't like. And so some of the things that I talk to clients about is seeing yourself as a scientist in your own journey and looking at some of the things that you already do and then what you can create, part of your creator experience in your life. And then you sift and sort what you like, what you don't like in that process. So that's often done by introspection. And sometimes we don't know. It's like, I don't know what I love to do. I didn't have a hobby for years. And then I accidentally stumbled on photography when my son gave me his iPad. And I started taking pictures and I started really enjoying it. And then I realized it had limitations in terms of the color that it picked up or the focus and how far it could take a picture, because I'd be at the sea watching people windsurf. And then I ended up buying a camera and I started taking more pictures and it became a hobby. But sometimes we just don't know. It's like, oh, I don't know what I like to do. So at that point, whether it's free or you pay for it, whether it's with people or on your own, then you start to try things. So you start to say, okay, I'm open to experience this, and you take that step. And then you start to just monitor what that experience feels like. So this is about enhancing your self-understanding. So through that process of introspection, you can start to understand your own strengths, your weaknesses, interests, dislikes. And that deeper sense of self-awareness can help you make more informed decisions about careers, relationships, personal lives, then by reducing the uncertainty. And they're the things you can kind of control. So there are things that we can't control and there are things that we can control. And there are some things we get involved with that we can influence more. Next thing is reducing comparison and building self-efficacy. I struggle to say that word. So it's really about, what that means is reflecting on your own experience and achievements rather than comparing yourself to others. So I'll give you some idea about that. When I was working alongside junior schools, there was one school that was really innovative at the time, and they decided to use this testing kit that we had going around at the time that looked at the different intelligences. So they had a CD, they put it in a computer, and these kids answered these questions, and it came out with a profile of what their strongest intelligence was. Was it musical? Was it logical? Was it mathematical? Was it, can't remember all the different intelligences. And then they'll get a chart with all different colours and it would show them. And you could see in a class of 30 children that everybody, very few people shared exactly the same strengths and weaknesses and intelligence. So there wasn't just one intelligence. What that meant is there'd be things that they were just more geared to be able to do more easily, effortlessly. But the school system, of course, doesn't nurture all the different intelligences and traits that children come with. The school system is designed on a particular system to what was making workers to work in factories or any other area of work that we needed for the economy. So, of course, the closer the fit in school, the easier the experience, the further away the fit in terms of who you are in your own authentic nature and how they teach and what you're learning and whether or not you ascribe to it, like it, or whatever, can in itself cause a lot of difficulties. So that's why it's really important to understand where your own achievements were, what you did well. I loved reading when I was at school, always did. I got a lot of joy out of that. It was escapism for me. I love riding my bike, so I always loved being out in nature, but I grew up in the city, so the closest to nature we had was big parks and lakes in some areas, or just loads of buildings and houses. So that helps you create a positive self-evaluation and mitigates feelings of worthlessness. So that reduces emotional turmoil. The moment we start comparing to other people in any way, we're walking down a road that is just not fruitful. And of course, there's lots of that going on in social media as people are posting selfies of their glorious lives. Which is why today I've allowed myself to be filmed without the camera, because I've lost the equipment to plug the mic and the camera in, and I really need the sound quality, so it's not perfect. And there's always something that happens to my recordings. I would never get them out if I look for perfection. Pretty much something happens with every recording. I might do a competition one day and ask people to work spot what it was. So then it's about clarifying goals and creating action plans. But when you're in a crisis, it's not always easy to do that. But with that self-reflection, we can identify small goals. Like I said, you get up in the day, you make your bed, you go on Google, you look for a hobby, or you look at what's going on meetup.com, what's going on in your area. You always wanted to do DJing, singing, writing, whatever it is, create a small step. So there's something I use with people in coaching called the coaching wheel, and that has all the different facets of our life, and we look at those different facets and we rate them, how satisfied we are in each of those facets, and we create a small goal for each, because you can even focus on one facet of your life. So you want to get more fit and you used to love swimming at school and now you've not been, so you could go back swimming. And I've had that with a few clients where they've just realized that they really miss swimming and now they're back to doing something that they really enjoy. And then that can help motivate you when you're struggling to have any motivation to leave your desk, to leave your living room. So a structured approach can help you, but like I said right at the beginning, these are quite a lot of information here. So listen to the information, let it sink in, and write notes to anything that stands out. Then you can look at the transcript and see which areas. And I will actually have a paper that you'll be able to get hold of that has these written out, these sections. So if you just email me, I'll leave the email address on there and I'll send you these areas that you can consider. So you've got, if you're a visual person, it helps. If you're auditory, you'll like the podcast, and the transcripts are great on YouTube anyway, because you can harness those. One of the key areas is promoting emotional regulation, and people who've had some difficult childhoods, experience trauma, adverse childhood experiences, might struggle with emotional regulation. And it's become a term that people are more familiar with now. But basically, it means that if we're not feeling, on a general sense, if we're not feeling peace and satisfied and in flow, things can knock us off balance fairly easy. But emotional regulation is being able to notice what you feel in the moment and then take some action, like breathing, accepting, talking to someone, validating what you're feeling, writing it down in your journal, and processing that experience. Where it gets out of hand is where people get overwhelmed by their emotions, and some people get flooded by emotions. So if you're feeling flooded by yours, then you certainly could benefit from some help from a professional that can help you do that. So emotional regulation work was often promoted in circles for DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, which was like group work where they spend a lot of time working on how they use these skills to manage day-to-day life. Because little things can happen. You can miss the bus, someone's rude to you in the shop, your partner comes home stressed, or there's a lot of arguments, and it just dysregulates you. So the more you're in dysregulation, the more your stress chemicals activate, and that'll add to that feeling of crises. So you really do need to focus on getting that more regulated. Listening to some very good quality music that relaxes you with some headphones on can really do that. And if you're really in overwhelm and you're tired, go to sleep and just get some rest. So we also need to think about encouraging positive change. So when we're reflecting on what's going on in our lives, sometimes the quarter life crises can be a catalyst for positive change. It doesn't feel like it at the time. We also have in spiritual circles, they talk about spiritual emergence. So we can have a crisis, but it can be emergence. It's where the soul, your authentic nature, is starting to come up and say, hey, listen to me. You're trying to make me do these things that I don't enjoy and I don't want to be a part of. So you can do them for a period of time. It's not wrong. It's not, no one should ever say to anyone, leave your job tomorrow. But you can start to put steps in to start making some positive changes. And again, you go through what those changes could look like. And so that's learning more about what you desire and how you can make adjustments that lead to your own personal growth and fulfilling life. Now, this is a journey. So once you're out of the crisis, this will continue. It's a journey. And at first it might seem a lot of work, but once you get the flavor of a few of the things that are making you feel more stable, more balanced, then you can add something in. So start off simple. I started this process of learning a lot of this stuff after the birth of my first son, when I was hit with very bad depression. And I just knew that if I didn't learn some stuff, um, I could just feel like that for the rest of my life. And I'd seen that in my family and I didn't want that. But it wasn't until I had my second son and went to college and learned a lot of the theory. Then I learned positive psychology and NLP and hypnosis and a whole range of other things. And I started to utilize those tools. Did I realize how these tools can massively change your mindset, your life, and help you stay out of crises? And of course, things happen to people in their lives that froze them in there through no fault of their own. So, this is not a one size fits all, but it's a process. But this is about how do you see where you're at, and how can you think about where you're at in comparison to the way that you have been thinking about where you're at, that can also contribute to throwing you into that crisis. So it's about the practical steps for self-reflection as well. So journaling, writing down, get a nice book, pen, write down your own thoughts and feelings. But like I said earlier, the CBT, which is what are your thoughts? What was the thought? What was the feeling? So I saw my friend, I haven't seen her for ages, and I felt joy. So that's good. Why was it joyful? You enjoy her company, she makes you laugh. I saw my friend, I haven't seen for ages, and I just felt stressed and tired because they're going through a real state at the moment. Okay, same situation, different experience. I went for a job, and it's the 10th job I've applied for, and I got that job, and I'm ecstatic because it just means now that I can do A, B, and C. I went for the 10th job and I've been turned down again. Feelings of doubt creeps in and the uncertainty. So it's good to capture it, but you don't stay with those feelings. You start to then learn to do something called reframe. So you look at what you're feeling, you validate those feelings. Of course, you'd feel like that, but you don't want to stay there. So you want to emotionally regulate, and you want to apply some of the tools so that you can bring yourself back out the depths of that despair, that crisis feeling, and move into a more peaceful state. So the other one is around practicing mindfulness, and there's I've got some meditations on the page that can help you just start to focus on your body, on your breath, helps you stay present. So that can often help you reduce anxiety about the future. And that's come through some of this research, that being more in the moment will help you feel more positive about the future than thinking about the future and trying to work out how to do it. So we need to keep some of the focus and goals short term. So goal setting sessions, they can really help. But as we know, sometimes we don't set goals because we know that maybe we won't follow through, or we set too many goals or unrealistic goals. So that's why it's often good to get help from someone that does some kind of coaching to help you think about the goals, because we need to set some that are realistic, that we could see ourselves doing, and that we get some kind of immediate result from. So for example, you can do a 30-day challenge if you're doing a health goal, do the plank every day if you've got the fitness and strength to do that, and that's 30 seconds. You can do that every day, that's achievable. Whereas if you said, I'm going to go in the gym every day and I'm going to go running, lift weights and all that, would that be achievable if you've never been in a gym? So you don't want to set yourself up for goals that aren't achievable, but you don't want to set goals that are too small. But when you're in a crisis, you just need to set a small goal. I need to breathe, I need to drink some water, I need to go for a walk. So incorporating those practices can really help. So the other aspect is a values assessment. And there is actually, I've got access to a value sheet, and it's got some instructions of how you work out what your values are. So basically it lists about 75 words, and you go down the list and you rate what's really important, sort of important, and not important. And then you focus on the really important values, and then you rate them, and then you start to work out what the values are and why. Then you start to think about maybe the work situation, family situation, relationships, and whether or not there's a values match. And then sometimes when it comes to meaning and purpose, it can be really useful to look at values. Same in relationships. You might value freedom and adventure. They might value freedom and adventure, and you can both work and still have that. But it's like, what does that look like in practice? Then you do a strength and weakness analysis, but not when you're feeling really quite derogatory and already mean to yourself. So you start off looking at your personal strengths and then any areas to improve. And again, I'm going to emphasize, this is a lot to take in all at one go. These are aspects of what you could do. You can't do it all in one go. Passionate exploration, engage in activities that bring you joy and fulfillment certainly are. I was always really academic, and when I was going through the stressful periods, fun fell off the radar. So then I had to start thinking about what are the kind of things I could do that would be fun. Sounds daft, doesn't it? But you can get really studious and you're locked in your studies, in your work, and it goes from being a 9 to 5 to an 8 to 6 to an 8 to 9. You go to bed and you're exhausted and you just get up and get back on that treadmill. And so if you're working like that, there's no wonder that you start to feel disillusioned and unhappy. So you have to pepper your week. And one of the things that I've suggested with some people is, if you've got some flexibility of the way that you work, on a Monday you could start early, on a Tuesday you could start later and go for a walk in the morning. On the Wednesday you could have a longer lunch break and work later on a Wednesday, and then be able to go somewhere at the lunchtime. My staff used to go to the gym or swimming and have a longer lunch, but they work later into the evening. And we applied that way of working in our service for over 2 years. It worked really well. We had some good trust. Clients got seen, and the work was really efficient because they were mostly in a state of productivity. They did get stressed, but it was the nature of the work. So we had to have a higher level of support because, there were therapists working with women where there was domestic abuse. If there's anything going on in your home life or your personal relationships, you certainly need to get support with that because it will massively impact how you feel, way more than people realize. And then when it comes to career reflection, there's a lot of information out there, but working out your values and also exercises that coaches use is, what did you always want to do as a kid? What did you love doing? Do you like exploring? Do you like being outdoors? So there's some people who love being outdoors and want to become landscape gardeners and fix up houses, and other people that fairly reclusive, quite happy to, and I don't want to stereotype it, but may work in IT or be writers or authors, and then do a life timeline exercise. And I'm actually going to do a separate podcast on timeline because I think that on its own is something massive that we can do, and it can be quite enjoyable. The other one is practice gratitude. So notice already what you're grateful for. If you've got a roof over your head, have you got some regular food coming in, if you've been able to get out and see your friends, if you write a list of what you're grateful for, that can switch the way that you're thinking is. So I think I've covered most of the key ones. Visualization is really useful. I'm going to put some links of people that I've listened to this week that talk about this in much more detail, way better than I do. But of course, I teach it and I practice it. And in the meditations that I've got online, that is about visualization. That's helping people who can envisage certain scenes and scenarios. And the more that you utilize that, the more that can have a really big mind, body, and spirit effect. Because the idea is that energy goes where energy flows, where attention goes. So when we're doing, say, meditation or mindfulness, we might say to somebody, notice your foot, how warm or cold it is. But 2 seconds ago, you weren't aware of your foot. You was aware of your heartbeat, or my hands are hot, so I'm aware of my hands. So just being aware, really, how our awareness takes our attention and where our attention goes, where we spend a lot of our time thinking, is something also worth reflecting on. So in terms of now, just realize that this is a real experience that a lot of people are having. If you've got children, young adults in your family, and they're feeling really stressed, things are very different these days. I know that when I left school, I didn't do that well at school. And when I left school, I just went into work, just no thought about there not being work. And when I left one job because I was bored or didn't want to do it, I went and got another job, and I never had any worries about getting work. Even into maybe I started to think about it a lot more and got more anxious about it as I got into my 40s. But between the ages of 16 and 22, and I had about 30 jobs actually, because I used to travel around, work for about 5 months, leave that job, go and get another. Never any problem. And I think there is a lot of work out there, but different types of work now. And so it makes us sometimes have to think about, okay, do we need to really consider, can I work online? Can I create my own company? Can I create my own work? Am I really good at something like posting social media, or, am I good at reading articles and spotting for mistakes? Can I create music? Can I do things for other people? So finding things that you could do that maybe could draw an income while you're also considering what else you do can be really quite productive and lucrative in some cases. If you're in the position where you're not working and you're looking, I would do some voluntary work in the meantime. One is that just helps us feel good when we're helping other people. We're helping people that are struggling to do things themselves. That can give our life meaning and purpose. And that's how I got into therapy work. I knew that I didn't want to do what I was doing previously. I was in hotel and catering until I was 23. Then I worked in an international courier company for over 2 years because I wanted to work in an office and do 9 to 5 and deal with people shouting down the phone at me all the time. And then Then I went into voluntary work, and it was the voluntary work where I was supporting people. It was like telephone helpline that then my colleagues were saying, hey, have you thought about? And that's often how our life unfolds. I rarely planned my career. The more I thought about it, the more it got in the way, in a way. So have a look at where you're at. Do some of this writing. Do a review of how you feel right now so that you can look back on this in a week or 2 weeks and 3 weeks and then in a month to see where you've made some shifts, because we need to know that some of these small steps that we're taking are having an impact. Therapy alone isn't enough. I've never thought, I've worked with people a lot and said, look, there are other aspects of your life that if you focus on them and make some changes will also make a difference to how you feel in the long run, so that they can sustain the changes and the positive feedback that they're getting either themselves or from other people. So in the meantime, I have some links on here that I'll put on. I've got lots of information and YouTube recordings on my website, melaniegabby.uk or .com. And I have some podcasts on here that talk about stress, mental health and well-being in general terms. And I'm going to have more focused on this particular research outcome that's looking at the experiences of young people. But do remember to connect, to find something that feels good, a hobby, start exploring what purpose might look like right now, because we can change our mind. You can have 4 or 5 careers, in different things. I know people that do. And while you don't know, do what you do know that feels good, whether that's horse riding, skiing, tennis, football, walking down the beach, looking after your friend's dog, playing with your nieces and nephews. So I hope that's been helpful, and any feedback from this. But like I say, it's a lot of information that I've left here today. So listen through it, pause, consider what's been said, and then see where you go from there. See you next time.